Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos. And can I be the only person in the world who thinks that Judy Garland is singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow Way Up High, There's a Land That I Dreamed of Once in a Lay-By"? Well, maybe, but I am seeking clarification on the point, and I know the very person to go to. Her name is Rebecca Perry. And she's in Edinburgh this year with a magnificent 5-star show called From Judy to Bette, the Stars of Old Hollywood, in which she pays tribute to and sings many of the songs associated with 4 of the great heroines of the golden age of Hollywood films and Hollywood musicals, looking at the careers of Bette Davis, Judy Garland, Betty Hutton and Lucille Ball, and doing so with a rare vivacity. It was a marvellous show, and as this episode is broadcast, it's still available to see at the Edinburgh Fringe. Details at the end of this episode. And Rebecca is no stranger to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. She's had huge critical acclaim with her previous shows, Confessions of a Red-Headed Coffee Shop Girl and Adventures of a Red-Headed Coffee Shop Girl. And as I say, she's now back in Edinburgh with From Judy to Bette. And she's not alone, because she is accompanied by her husband, whose name is David Kingsmill, who, as you know, is a presenter here on Musical Talk. And it's a great delight to welcome him back to Britain from Canada. And David was acting as her piano accompanist for the first half of the run here in Edinburgh, being replaced for the second half of the run by Quinton Norton. Well, having seen the show and loved it, it seemed to me too good an opportunity not to sit down with Rebecca and David to talk about this wonderful show. And so that's exactly what I did. So it's time to settle down, duct tape your headphones to your head so you can't be disturbed, and listen to this wonderful conversation with David Kingsmill and Rebecca Perry. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Perry, and my show is called From Judy to Bette, the Stars of Old Hollywood, happening at the Edinburgh Fringe, 7:30 every day.
And I'm David Kingsmill, and I am the musician for said show, and an old haunt of this podcast.
I was going to say David Kingsmill of this parish.
Indeed.
I think would be the way I would describe it. It's lovely to see you back in the country. Rebecca, I know you've been here on plenty of occasions, and you've sold out Edinburgh as well.
Yeah.
So I know the two of you have had, historically, tremendous Edinburgh success each. But the show we're talking about today, From Judy to Bette, it's already been burnished across the world, I think that's the best way of saying. So tell us a little bit about the show and how it came to be.
Absolutely. So it was initially commissioned in Toronto, Canada, as a half-an-hour piece for a festival called the Next Stage Theatre Festival, where basically across Canada, 10 pieces are chosen and curated in one theatrical building. So I was given the cabaret space, so I only had a hot 30 minutes to make something happen. And of course, I found out I was accepted while I was still at the 2015 Edinburgh Fringe Festival, still performing Confessions of a Red-Headed Coffee Shop Girl. So of course, I had lots of inspiration around me, and I was just sort of thinking, what do I want to write a show about next? And of course, I thought all of the women that I grew up admiring, because my grandmother was my babysitter, so of course I admired all the wonderful women from the movie musical era that is I guess now a bygone era, an era of yesteryear.
We're really talking the great 30s musicals.
We are.
And a little bit beyond.
But the golden age and up.
Yes.
So basically...
to the tarnished age where we are now.
Exactly. So this half-an-hour iteration happened. David was actually the dramaturge, one of two, for this half-an-hour iteration. And then, of course, we got so much interest in it that we expanded it to both a 60-minute version and a 90-minute version with an intermission version for the sake of touring, because in Canada, different theatres want different things.
Well, it's useful that you can put it in different formats because that makes it madly versatile.
Absolutely, and we find it just gives people options, and it makes them sort of see it as like less of a solo show and more of like a polished piece. But yeah, since then, oh my goodness, it's been around the world 3 times, I think. We've done 2 tours in the east coast of Canada, around Ontario, 2 tours in the UK, all around a bunch of rural theatres that have been lovely. And here we are. And already there's stuff coming down the pipeline.
Yep.
Nothing signed in blood, but, hello, Australia, Hong Kong, what's up?
There is a future to be had.
There's a future to be had.
But let's go back to that first half-hour iteration, because the conceit of the show, certainly the Edinburgh version, is that you are remembering and paying tribute to and performing the works of and the careers of, that's a muddled sentence, but you get my drift, of 4 of the great film actresses who appeared principally in musicals, although not exclusively. And let's name them.
Yeah, absolutely. The legends of yesteryear are Bette Davis, Judy Garland, Lucille Ball, and the lesser known but still very lovely Betty Hutton.
But in that first half-hour version, were you able to get all 4 in? Were there all 4 women in there, or was it their songs? I mean, how did that half-hour show start?
I was able to fit all 4 women in, but dare I say it was even more of a breakneck pace than it currently is.
It's got good pace now, yes.
That
is to its advantage.
Absolutely, it's got flow now, whereas before it was like
I don't know her.
Throwing ideas at people. And I think now it has room to breathe.
Yeah, it was a little bit more of a rushed affair. Each of the ladies had maybe 2.5 songs, where now they're able to sit comfortably in 4 with additional spoken material that wasn't there previously. It's a bit more wholesome, it's a bit more informative, and it has more of an arc from beginning to end, rather than what was simply by dint of time requirement more of a zigzag previously that just kind of got there rapidly, coherently, but maybe not with as much panache and finesse that it's got now.
Oh, I'd say Elan, but there will.
I would also say that the message of sort of these 4 women found Hollywood and they left it in better shape than when they found it is much more of a thing that can land in the 60 and 90 minute version, definitely. Because you can really take a second to say, like, well, here's what they did that was different from everybody else.
They are groundbreakers, aren't they? All 4 of them.
Absolutely.
But also you have ordered the 4-star version in its slightly more breathing sense, in a very organic way, in the sense that, it's right that you start with Bette Davis because she's there at the forefront. And then it does slip seamlessly into Judy Garland because there are connections, and Judy Garland obviously into Betty Hutton because many of us know that the Annie Get Your Gun story, where Betty Hutton replaced Judy Garland. And then, of course, from Betty Hutton, you can definitely see the beginnings of sort of a zany, well, not beginnings, but
like an
exemplar, yeah, exactly, which takes us into Lucille Ball. And as you quite rightly point out, and you throw it away, quite rightly, you don't over-egg it. Lucille Ball owned her own television studio.
I know.
Desilu.
Yeah, Desilu Studios.
And indeed, I think they're connected with Star Trek in that.
They are.
So, that's in the 90-minute version.
Yeah.
We couldn't quite cram it into the 60, but yeah, she's basically responsible for that going ahead in the first place.
Well, that's done well.
I know.
And Mission Impossible, actually.
I know.
Oh, really?
She took chances on a lot of things that I think other people were like, eh.
Well, once again, sometimes you have to be brave. You have to, what do they say? Speculate to accumulate, as it were. So,
I like it.
But so we've got this 60-minute version. How many years ago was that? Did you say 2015, 16, something like that?
So 2000. Oh gosh, I may have misquoted. It was 2016.
It was Edinburgh Fringe 2015. You were thinking about it. It was January 2016. It actually premiered.
There we go. Thank you. And then since then, the expanded version happened sort of at the end of 2016, so that it could tour for 17, 18, and now 19.
So, and obviously that means it has been massively successful. I've had the pleasure of seeing it. I confirm back to you that it has been, and it continues to be massively successful. And it's highly entertaining in its own right, because sometimes a walk through the careers of any actor or famous person can be formulaic. Sometimes they almost have to be. And everyone is up here this year at Edinburgh. I've seen a musical about Yuri Gagarin. I'm seeing a comedy about Eutha Joyce, who was a sitcom star in the 1970s here. So, pretty much everyone is here in some form, ghostly mostly. Alice Ghostly mostly, but that's another actress. Gosh, showing my roots there, which is odd for a bald man. But the circumstances are that I like the fact that you do flow. And it's not a biographical telling, it is a tribute and a highlighting of why these women were so successful.
It's a salute to them.
It is a salute, is a very good word. But then boiling down how you want to do that must have been quite difficult. You mentioned sort of 2.5 songs. Now there's a few more chances to show the full song to reflect you don't mind me saying, also your own particular powerhouse skills. You know,
thank
you are
you.
a powerhouse performer. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But how did you pick the songs? Because I suppose the unwritten names on the programme, if you like, are Irving Belin and Frank Loesser and the great songwriters.
Cole Porter.
I mean, some of the people we've not actually... some are very famous and some are less famous. But the songs are all cracking songs. They've stood the test of time. But there are more songs than that in the world. How did you pick the ones you went for? And how did you pick the songs which also most exemplified those characters?
It's interesting the way you worded that, actually, because there was so much to choose from, particularly with the Judy Garland canon.
Yeah. Could be here for
I
hours.
could make a whole show just about Judy, and it could be 5 hours. So we basically tried to go for songs that we felt, and I say we because sort of it was this sort of roundtable discussion when the half-an-hour version was being formulated. Songs that sort of exemplified what their biggest character traits were. So for Judy Garland, it is that sort of lower singing that's kind of stormy. For Betty Hutton, it's her comedic skills. So it's the things that make you laugh. For Lucille Ball, she sort of has this like hilarious sort of biting nature when she's singing. She would almost talk sing. Of the four, she's probably like the least trained as far as singing goes. And of course for Bette Davis, the fact that she rarely sang, it was almost sort of about saluting those little moments, but having them surrounded by all of her famous sort of one-line singers. But I could pick a million. I think these ones are the ones, first of all, that I grew up loving. So like they're connected to movies that I love. But also they're ones that sort of like I have an emotional connection with as well. So whether they mean something to me about a certain part in my life or whatever. Because ultimately the show was formulated out of love. These are four women who have heavily influenced me and how I've decided I want to be and find my place in the world. Which, thank goodness, it's guns blazing is their theme.
Well, it's very, very Annie, get your gun.
It is.
Although I assume you travelled here by trolley bus.
I did.
I think it was also a question of finding an interesting blend between stuff that people would know, because you want the hook.
Yeah.
You want to be able to bring people in with a Somewhere Over the Rainbow or You Can't Get a Man with a Gun, but also finding things that people didn't know so well. And I mean, a lot of people, with the exception of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, had no idea that Bette Davis recorded a solo album.
I actually didn't either. That was a
surprise for us,
we
too.
caught you by surprise.
You did. I mean, I'm aware, because they were all doing it at the time. I mean, obviously, Ethel Merman was doing hundreds of albums, had done hundreds of albums, but I think in the 70s we got her disco album.
Yep, the Ethel Merman disco album.
There's some interesting stuff out there in the 70s, worth digging up, but I wasn't aware that Bette Davis was one of them. So.
Yeah. But I think
it took me by surprise too, trust me.
Yeah, very much. But I think that was it. Was let's bring people in with things that they know. Let's make sure that the show can be familiar, accessible to people who know the music but not much else. But then also bring something out that they haven't heard before, because you don't just want to trot out a best of. You want, especially with a show like this where it's all about exploring what these women achieved, you also want to find some of the things that are maybe lesser known.
Some envelope pushing, in fact.
Yeah.
One that I think stumps audience members too is the fact that Betty Hutton was the first person to sing It's Oh So Quiet, because that song has stood the test of time so much, everyone knows it as the Bjork song from the 90s.
Well, nearly everyone.
I
do know it's a Betty Hutton, but
I'm
yes.
happy you do.
I didn't.
But
that one caught me.
Most people my age went, oh, I just thought that was a Bjork song, and I was like, no.
She's a Johnny-come-lately. I will say, however, I do like some of the lesser-known Frank Loesser stuff you pop in. So, and we might as well talk about the underscore, David, because you're on piano, I think, playing about 95% of the time during the show, because which makes it cinematic, actually. What it does, it has that odd effect of being like incidental music. And for those of us who have got tuned ears, it's a jolly show in a form of dichotomy, in the sense that you're at the centre stage performing beautifully, wonderfully and splendidly, but in the background David is also performing wonderfully on the piano with an underscore. So I've got one ear going, oh, I know that song, and oh, I know that song, and I've got you in the middle going, singing, and I think, I know that song as well. Obviously you don't play a different song when you are singing, Rebecca. But
like there's I Love Lucy underscoring in the Lucy bit, or if I'm referencing Gone with the Wind, David's underscoring with Gone with the Wind.
So you are very much the man who goes rumble, rumble, rumble on the black notes, which is a Betty Hutton song you sing, a Frank Loesser number, I think, and a lesser-known Frank Loesser number, if I may be allowed to say that.
Absolutely.
In a way, I was very sad that we didn't get... I think she's famous also for... I'm sure you do know Hamlet.
Yes.
Which, of course, I think is one of the funniest songs ever written.
It's so funny. It's also quite a long song.
Yeah, it can't be cut. And that's why I thought... Because I always, funny enough, I always associate... I think they were on an album I had once called Frank Loesser Revisited, a Ben Bagley album. Well worth finding if you can.
Yeah.
He was a very strange man. I don't know if you've ever come across Ben Bagley, but he basically saved lots of unknown or lesser-known songs by all the great composers, and then got very weird cast to come in and record them. So Anthony Perkins is on the Gershwin album.
What?
Yeah, exactly. Lawrence Harvey Harvey, who's not so well known these days, is on the Noel Coward album.
Really?
Yeah, so they are where Ben Bagley is the name you want to write down.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now.
Yeah.
Very good.
Add that to the list.
Write that down in your jotting book.
Done.
But the Hamlet song, which I know from the Betty Hutton version, and also from B.B. Osterwood, who I think is the person who sings it on the Ben Bagley album, is right next to, he plays Rumble, 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 which I think Kay Ballard sings, by the way, on that album.
I don't think I've heard that.
She's jolly good. But yes, you're right, but Hamlet you can't really cut down because it's a proper joke, joke,
It has to be
story.
set up sequentially. Yeah.
But it is a great song and not very well known. So how are people responding to those lesser known songs?
Actually, Rumble, it seems to be the favorite number of a lot of people because they're like, well, we knew she could make us laugh, but we didn't know that she could sort of like story tell at the same time. Because Can't Get a Man with a Gun is musical, but it does sort of repeat itself, whereas Rumble kind of has this like sequence of events. She goes through all the emotions. Like
It's also, I think it where we ended up landing it in the show, if I may credit us for a minute, I think it's landed really nicely because it's a very energetic piece of music.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a good, not that the show ever slows down at any point, as you've already pointed out, but there are points in it where it just re-engages people, and I think that's very, very much one of them.
It is up energy. It's also a tour de force. Because as you say, actually, the performer, whether they be Betty Hutton or you, Rebecca, have to go through those. There is a bucket load of frustration in the person singing.
Yeah.
And she is frustrated about everything that this man has done and the attempts that she's made to stop him playing the piano at all hours and the failure of said attempts. And frustration can be comic, as it is in this number. But that's actually anger and frustration are very energetic and draining emotions.
You have to go big or go home. I'm usually like absolutely exhausted at the end of that number, and I'm like, oh, we still got to get through Lucy. Okay, pick up my socks. Let's go.
Are there any other numbers that have turned out to be surprise sort of hits, whether due to placing or just because people have really responded to them? Known or non-known, it doesn't really matter.
I think After You've Gone, which is the second Judy Garland song I sing, people always forget about the musical For Me and My Gal. And so they forget that that was quite literally meant to be a vehicle to continue Judy Garland's stardom. Sure, it's Gene Kelly who's alongside her, I think. And he's amazing, but like, you can't take your eyes off Judy. And so I've had all these people message me being like, I forgot how good that one is. Thank you for reminding me. I'm going to go watch it again. So After You've Gone was one. Also, and I think people kind of forget that Lucille Ball was in MAME because she was kind of, she couldn't quite hold a candle to Angela Lansbury, who did it on stage. Because at this point, Lucille Ball was also a chain smoker for a number of years. She acts it wonderfully, but I know there are stories saying like she could barely get her sort of breath support through one song, so they had to splice things together. Oh, no. And this is like back in the day. I obviously don't include that in the show because I want to talk about her achievements and the positives. But
it's good show business gossip.
Exactly. So I figured for a podcast it's worth telling. But I know people were like, oh, right, MAME, like the Angela versus Lucille Ball thing. There's this very funny story, and I didn't include it because I think it sheds Lucille in a bad light. But basically, Angela Lansbury is performing MAME on Broadway, and she sees Lucille Ball in the wings. And Lucille Ball says, oh, you'll be a shoo-in for the movie. The next day they announce that Lucille Ball is doing the part of MAME.
So fully known.
I think she fully knew, but she didn't want to like break Angela's heart. I know that Lucille says in one of her memoirs, like she had nothing to do with the decision. She just didn't have like the guts to tell Angela. But I know that Angela Lansbury like went to the premiere and like said like Lucille did a fine job, and was a really good sport about it. So I still think that it shows, Angela and Lucille obviously had a good relationship about it, whereas there have been some tumultuous competition between other divas in other times.
It is difficult, isn't it? It's not the actor's fault. Although, going slightly backwards, I don't know if you know when they came to make the film of My Fair Lady, they originally offered...
was it Julie Andrews, I think?
Well, actually, I was thinking Professor Higgins. They offered it first to Cary Grant.
Yes!
And apparently Cary Grant both said, I will not do this, and also if you do not cast Rex Harrison, who's made a big hit of it on the stage, I will tell everyone not to go.
That's amazing. Oh, what a good sport.
I like that. Judy, which is as good a segue as we're going to get. Mm-hmm. So, this is a ridiculous question because you love all these women, but is there one you think speaks, I'm not going to ask but speaks to you more? Because Judy. It's a very personal show. It is. And why is that?
I knew the answer before you even finished. I think I grew up and her music always has this sort of undercurrent of vulnerability. And so she's the one who wears her heart on her sleeve the most, whether she means to or not, because we all know she didn't have the easiest life. And so I think when there's someone like that who has stuck it out through thick and thin, through all these wonderful or horrible situations, you can't help but admire them because it makes their storytelling, whether through song or monologue, so darn honest. You're just drawn to it.
It's funny, actually, because you can still be vulnerable and as tough as old boots because of experience. I mean, funny enough, later today I'll go to see Sweet Charity.
Hey.
And there's a character who's as tough as old boots. You know, that poor girl gets put through the mill and remains vulnerable and lovable. So actually, you sort of wonder, now I'm starting to think, what would have happened if Judy Garland had been the right age to play Sweet Charity? That would have been an interesting piece.
She would have risen to the occasion, I'm sure.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. So, let's talk then about the underscore.
Yes.
David, how are you left to your own devices? Does it change every day, or do you now have how did you pick the songs for that, or was that once again round the table and everyone agreed?
It was a sort of weird.
Right.
It's been a slow distillation. It was a round table to begin with, and then Quinton, who's Rebecca's sort of regular musician, who's actually taking over from me in a few days, kind of started nailing that down. And then when I started playing this show more, which was when it was expanding as well, so we needed more content, I sort of took over and started adding more stuff in myself as well.
So it's organic, isn't it?
It is, and it's some of the suggestions also came from the director, Michael. He, when we were doing the expansions particularly, he and I would sort of bounce back and forth ideas for different pieces. There's a section in it where there's 4 producers who sort of sequentially insult the 4 women just as a sort of setup to the challenges they were facing. And between the 2 of us, we came up with the idea of having You Gotta Get a Gimmick play very quietly for all of 8 seconds, to the point where some people don't even know it's in the show, and I go home humming it for the next 3 hours.
There's a few like that. There's some 42nd Street.
Stuff just drops in, and some of them are more obvious than others, and some of them go on for longer than others. But it was a combination of a tonal choice, sometimes to match what's being said, and actually sometimes to play against it.
Contrapunctual, as it were, yeah.
And also things that themes that are relevant to the women, like the I Love Lucy score plays pretty regularly under Lucille Ball's section, or often I'll riff off the song that just got sung. So at the end of You Can't Get a Man with a Gun, I will play You Can't Get a Man with a Gun for 10 bars. Yes.
I'm sure you'd agree, because I know Quentin has said this before. He's also loving that because I'm talking before every song, there's time to play like the full introduction to a song.
Yep.
Whereas in a cabaret scenario, usually you just start from the get-go.
In we go.
From the first note. And so I know you've gotten to play all these wonderful, sometimes like 20-bar introductions that musicians normally don't play unless it's the full-blown musical.
Well, or even to the point where because these, I don't think they're, off the top of my head, I can't think of a song that's actually sung in its entirety in the show. They're all abridged to an extent. But the...
you do get the opening verse of Over the Rainbow.
Yeah, we fit in almost all of Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah.
I think only one verse is missing.
That sounds about right.
And there's a couple of slightly abridged verses, aren't there, here and there as well, with the first couplet rather than the whole thing or something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the nice thing is that some of the verses that even aren't necessarily particularly well known, especially in the 90-minute edition of this, you get to almost play that entire verse under some of the dialogue that's going on. So it's actually been really nice to work out what goes there, and also what little things can kind of be snuck in at points.
So
because they fit
fun a little bit, yeah.
But just giving a bit more variety still, because there is such a back catalogue to all of these people. And
even Bette Davis.
Even Bette Davis. And neglecting that, would be a shame. So that's essentially the story of that. But it to answer your other part of the question, yes, it does change a little bit, in the sense that the piece is very much a conversation with the audience. So Rebecca says at one point in time, does everyone know who Betty Hutton is? Yeah. If there is a resounding yes from the audience, the underscore gets cut short very quickly. Whereas
because you don't need it.
Yeah.
You don't need it. Whereas if 10% of the audience says no, there's a little bit of the show that then does go ahead that otherwise wouldn't.
You Hutton us up.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've only had 2 times where I've been able to skip that little Hutton introduction.
Yeah.
Britain or, of course, everywhere.
Once in Britain, once in Toronto.
Much rarer. You get more of a response in Britain. I think she's a better known quantity over here, but there's still a lot of people who maybe until You Can't Get a Man with a Gun gets sung, don't know who you're talking about.
It kind of helps trigger who she is.
Oh, that one. I saw her when I watched it on the television. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let's ask about that a little bit then, because have you noticed different levels of popularity for your 4 selected stars, or remembrance, should we say, rather than popularity, in different countries?
I have, even just different areas of
really?
England. Oh, absolutely.
And Scotland.
Yes. Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. I guess I was thinking of the UK
because you've already done a tour of England,
just
haven't you?
specifically.
Yes,
yeah. But here, because we're sort of early into the run, right now I'd say it's a tie between Judy Garland and Lucille Ball being the most popular here in Edinburgh. But as far as when we went around England specifically, sort of certain areas would really gravitate towards either Betty Hutton or Lucille Ball, and like remember Judy's songs and Betty Hutton's songs. But it was just sort of interesting to me because I think I assumed when I came over here, Judy would just be the most popular.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the case. People love those Bette Davis one-line zingers. And as far as in Canada, so we're divided by provinces. Sort of the more, for lack of a better term, country provinces, they knew more the Judy Garland songs, less sort of Bette Davis, Lucille Ball. And then when you're in sort of those more populated areas like cities in Ontario and stuff like that, I think Lucille Ball takes the cake.
See, that's very interesting because from my own perspective,
Yeah.
Judy Garland is my favourite of the four.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot of time for Bette Davis, who hasn't. And of course I know Lucille Ball and I know Betty Hutton, but I suppose from the prism of musical theatre, I know more Betty Hutton than Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball for me is a television comedienne, and they repeated all the I Love Lucy's for about 400 years in the 1980s.
Exactly.
Here, but I don't think very much since. So it's one of those things where actually I would say on day-to-day presence, you can still see a Bette Davis or a Judy Garland film on television.
Yeah.
You can occasionally see a Betty Hutton film on television. I think you'd be hard pressed to find Lucille Ball regularly appearing on British television.
Right.
I actually didn't know. I'm sure I'd seen bits of, but didn't know Lucille Ball or Bette Davis until I started working on this show. And I feel like I actually haven't seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but I feel certain I've seen bits of their back catalogue without realising it.
That must have happened, but yeah.
It seems unlikely that it hadn't, but yeah, I think it's interesting generationally as well. Who knows what?
Oh well, that must be not a complication, but a thing to take into account. How are your audiences, and do they change everywhere?
Absolutely.
I mean, you will of course be bringing in an older generation because those are the stars for their generations, but who else is coming?
Well, what's interesting to us is we're sort of having like polar opposites, for lack of a better term. Like we are having sort of the generation that grew up listening to these wonderful stars, whether it was on film, television, or through song. But then we're having people my age who are either fans of like vintage clothing, sort of retro hairstyles, or just kind of want to participate in this sort of like renaissance of like living vintage. Yeah. So they'll come and see this to sort of learn about what was happening during the time that they're trying to harken back to. But we'll also have people like grandmothers bringing granddaughters, and it's lovely because it's passing this information on. And then, of course, they go home and they binge watch all through, like, Judy's canon or Bette Davis's canon. So we're kind of very heartened by how many young people are coming. And it sort of gives me hope because the entire point of writing this show was don't let these women be lost to history's pages. I'm aware that it's rare that even I am so obsessed with them. I'm 30. I wasn't alive when all this was happening. I'm thankful.
Many of them were dead before.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So luckily, my grandmother dusted off her VHS collection and saved the day.
I think, to our knowledge, at least in terms of people who've actually said numbers out loud, we know we've had a 10-year-old in the audience who had an absolute. Well, there was a show in Canada in Rebecca's hometown actually recently, and she absolutely loved it.
Perfect.
And when we were touring England, we had a 97-year-old come up to us who'd met Bette Davis.
Good Lord.
And we had a man who was, I think, 83 or 84, who had also seen Judy at the Palladium.
Which she did play, of course.
And that's what, actually, funnily enough, something we get more in England than in America, or in North America, I should say, is people coming up and saying, "Oh, I met this person when," which is delightful, and they come up and they share their memories, and that's another sort of beautiful addendum to these shows, is hearing somebody who's been brought back to 50 years ago or 40 years ago when Bette Davis played up in Blackpool or whatever, and they remember this and it brings it back to them.
Although we did have a very special instance where we were actually hired in Toronto for a birthday party, and we weren't told much information, but we arrived and it was for this man's mother who was turning, was it 91? And
something like that.
So we did the show for they had this like wonderful giant grand ballroom of a living room, and we did the show, and after she talked about how she remembers when like Annie Get Your Gun opened, and like
Good
just
Lord.
it was
48 or 49.
it was just wonderful to hear her talk. She must have been a little girl, and saying how like this is sort of triggered memories for her.
And she's lived off moonshine ever since.
I know, but I thought, what a wonderful birthday present.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about your performance as these women, because I think this is an interesting thing, because what you're not doing is an impression of these performances. You are singing them as you, Rebecca, and yet at the same time you are also able to evoke something of their characteristics as women, but also in their vocal
Quality.
mannerisms. Yes, absolutely. And that's interesting to me, because what I felt I was getting was you evoking while still being you. And I thought it was very successful. But that's a balance, isn't it? You've got to know where to plop it from complete impersonation, but then actually where is the heart, to actually all I'm doing is a cover.
Yeah.
And actually you found a very excellent middle way, which I think ticks all the boxes.
I guess our thought, because this was a large discussion when it was initially being created, was, I'm not going to impersonate, I'm going to channel them. Just in the sense that, like, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head, sometimes impersonation can come off as insincere, and the entire point is this show is about my love for these women and how I don't want them to be forgotten. So I think channeling and sort of, there was a reviewer that also had a good word for it as well.
Yeah, she said Perry doesn't impersonate, she encapsulates.
There you go.
Oh, that's nice. I like
Which
that.
is a very nice little thing, and I think it really does sum up what's going on here. And I think,
it's a purposeful decision.
It is, and I think you make the valid point that I think it's one of those things where impersonation as a show can come across as sincere, but impersonation as a part of a show, it starts to become
gimmicky,
a little bit clownish in a way that this show, that's not what this is about.
No, this is 100% sincere from first to last.
And we've seen some pretty sort of insincere imitations of Judy Garland that kind of make fun of the fact that she, obviously didn't have the greatest life in her later years. They're doing the sort of twitchy, I'm on pills thing, and that just breaks my heart. So none of that was going to be had for this show.
Although we do get The Man That Got Away.
We do.
Which is my favourite Judy Garland song.
Oh, I love that song.
And incidentally, the theme tune adopted by one of Britain's first gay comics, Larry Grayson.
Oh, cool!
Who was big in the
you're
70s.
Right.
Yes, he used
That's
to use
very
the man
suiting.
because, well, in his case, of course, it was the man who got away from heterosexuality, I suppose.
Oh, I love that.
When he was a lone gay, one of the very few gay voices in British culture, yes.
I hadn't connected that dot, but you're absolutely right.
I think Judy sang it better. So, but I think that's a fantastic song, and of course, in the context of the film, she is portraying all her vulnerability there as well, isn't she? With James Miss.
My favorite A Star Is Born of all the A Star Is Borns.
the original. A Star
Yes,
Is Born,
exactly.
Yes, yeah, well, you're not going to. I know people have tried, but I don't think you can top James Mason and Judy Garland.
I agree.
That combination is pretty strong, I think. So, you made that decision. Have you ever found that you've rebalanced it one way or the other over the time of the show? In the sense of actually, you've done it for a bit and realised that actually you were veering too close to not impersonation but the evocation, or putting yourself at the centre of the show is important because it is your story actually. I'm maybe not saying this very well, but have you had to reposition yourself in response to audience responses?
I
They're always
have,
interesting.
especially while we were on tour the second time. I was sort of like getting a kick out of how many times I could make audience members laugh a show, which is like, it's like a rule in sort of for serious actors. Like, it shouldn't be about what you're getting out of the audience. It should be,
It's addictive though, isn't it?
It is. That's the problem. And so I think I got a little bit sticky. And so when we had our rehearsals for bringing it to Edinburgh, it was very much starting again from a place of, why did you write this? Why do you love these women? How can we make sure the love is present in this piece? And there is still laughter, but it's through me sort of sincerely showing what I loved about their songs. So I'm glad that we've gotten back to that place of love, but there have been times where on tour, my musician who kind of would be there also representing the director a little bit, being like, I think maybe you were a little over the top for this Lucy quote the other night, or like just, he would gently say things.
You have to be grounded though, don't you? Because,
and sincere.
You see this with a lot of shows though, they're great shows and then they move on and on and on, and then they eventually sort of, when I say go to seed, I mean like a potato, in the sense of still a potato,
Yeah.
but it's just a little bit past its best. But you can bring it back. I mean, I don't know if you know the famous story of a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum in the 1960s when it first came out with it was Zero Mostel, playing
it was,
Pseudolus. And I think, I'm afraid this is quite a vulgar joke, but there's a joke in it about they need to find a body.
Oh, yeah.
And he makes a joke about, I'll talk to my friend the body snatcher, he owes me a body, or he owes me a favour, I think the joke is. And then somewhere along the run, after a year or so, Zero Mostel changed it to the slightly filthier, I'll go and speak to my friend the body snatcher, he owes me a snatch. Yeah. I mean,
that sounds very Zero.
Yes, I'm told it has a second meaning, but luckily I don't know. But anyway, the director came in to see it a couple of, and it got a huge laugh, so in it stayed. The director came in just as they do periodically to keep check on it, saw that and said, no, that's self-indulgent, that's terrible, take it back. And so whilst it is all so human to get the laugh and want to keep the laugh, you do periodically have to recalibrate.
Yeah, you've got to check in with yourself.
And particularly when a show is, because it's massively successful as yours is, it's been running for a long time. I'm not suggesting you've done anything like Zero Mostel.
Well, and speaking vocally as well, there's sort of a similar challenge. And one of the most more recent and very good examples of that would be Just in Time, which we added in comparatively recently while the show was being expanded. And while we were rehearsing that and prepping it, Rebecca was very, very much going for how does Judy sing it? What are her mannerisms? Where are her pauses sitting? Where does she do this, that, and the other? And since that initial let's get used to this song, it has then been pulled back into, okay, now how does Rebecca sing Just in Time as a tribute to Judy without being, the last thing you ever want to be in this show is a parrot. It's all about finding that Rebecca's take on it to be Rebecca's show. And that was quite an interesting procedure as well, because that is so character heavy of Judy. Like, she is, you see these concert performances of her, and she is 100% Judy in that song, and just finding that balance was also an interesting process.
Well, we love that we found sort of the sheet music, and then we listened to her version, and we were like, oh my gosh, she's not following the music. She changes keys 5 times.
Does she really?
We're not doing that.
No.
but we did sort of choose certain moments to sort of elevate the Judy factor in it.
Yeah, it's the evocation again, or the encapsulation, as we were saying earlier.
Same with Rumble too. Betty Hutton barely sings a single correct note. So we were like, what of that do we want to use? And sort of where are we singing like her, but then where am I going to actually sing?
Yeah.
So it's been a fun balance to strike, I think.
Yes.
Have any of the songs given you, when I say greater respect for, that's a very heavy-handed term for appreciation of the art of any of the songwriters?
Oh, absolutely.
Who then and why? Which is an open question, by the way.
I
you may discuss.
was going to say, I think this is a double question, but I think basically, just in general for me, is just how good back in the day sort of storytelling through song was.
Yeah.
How much songs actually forwarded the plot. There's sort of a theme right now with contemporary musical theater where it's like a stop the show, sing about something, then continue the show. I think it gave me an appreciation for how much these big movie musicals, and some of which went to the stage, kept things moving.
Yeah. I think my biggest example is Rumble, actually.
Yeah.
I have a huge appreciation for Rumble, as much as anything else, because having not heard the song previous to this show, I watched the videos online of Betty Hutton actually singing it, and we went, okay, yeah, this is going into the show. I went on, I bought the sheet music online, and the sheet music I bought online, it was the only sheet music I could find at the time, is terrible.
Yeah. It was hard tracking down some of these songs.
It's one of those ones where the piano plays exactly what the singer is singing, and the left hand is this uninspired kind of...
So it's a melody line and
up,
boogie.
down, up, down, up, down. And so I've actually... This is one of the ones I had a hand in, and I actually just rewrote the... Like, I'm not playing anything that is on the page in front of me.
It's a Kingsmill orchestration.
For the most part. There's a few exceptions to that.
Which tips its hat to Betty's orchestration specifically.
And working that through and going, what is she doing in this? And realizing that in order to make the song work, what I needed to do was make as the song goes through, make the accompaniment itself more frantic while not detracting from the song in any way. And you realise
enhancing it, I think, if you don't mind me saying. I think because what I saw was a very excellent double act, actually, in that sense. I think that you're a very sensitive player, if you don't mind me saying, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that you knew when to up and you know when to down.
Yeah.
Not just on the incident of the music, but in the performance as well.
He's got good instincts.
I hope that feels for you, Rebecca. But
it helps me.
You're singing on a bed, as it were.
It makes me comfortable. Yeah, just because I know he's got my back. It's always fun to perform with a talented musician who also happens to be your husband. Yeah. But I've got 3 or 4 musicians that perform with me, and I'm so privileged
not
to
all
have.
Your husbands.
They're not.
No,
they're
good.
not. No. But for example,
number 4, please.
right. But Quentin, who tours, and Noah, like for example, they always have such good instincts in how we can sort of support each other, and I feel very lucky to have such wonderful musicians.
Back to the show.
Yeah.
Now, it's obviously had a past. And it still has a future. I appreciate nothing is ever written in stone until it's written in stone, or blood if it's show business.
Yeah.
But here in Edinburgh, it's running on until the very end, isn't it?
It is.
Now that's quite a... I know you've done it before, but it's quite an ordeal, by which I mean a physical ordeal.
It is a marathon.
Yeah. And I suppose, how do you both prepare for that?
We actually sort of... I think it's safe to say we act like the opposite of rock stars. Like, we really do take care of ourselves. We're trying to get as much sleep as possible. I mean, sometimes that's not always possible.
I did hear a story about canned coffee this morning.
Well, exactly. So it's kind of ironic. That was a good rock star moment. But I know a lot of people are networking until 5 a.m.
Yeah.
That's not me. I've got a whole show to sing by myself. Your hands have to move as fast as I'm singing. So I think we take good care of ourselves. We've tried to do a lot of sort of, contacting presenters and theaters as early as possible in the game. So now it's more just about following up with them so we can attend all of these sort of... the Fringe Central has wonderful workshops for professional development. We're here to meet people and see if this show is going to continue to have a life.
Yeah.
And I think because, during the year we've had some stretches where it's been almost a month of on the road. We are prepared for it. This is our
not a surprise,
third rodeo as far as the Fringe is concerned, Ed Fringe.
Nicely put.
Although also by far the most demanding.
Yeah.
Now, why is that?
Just because it is so consistent. I mean, I'm guessing numbers here, but I would say between 70 and 75% of this show is sung.
Yes,
and 95% of this show has music running underneath it, which means neither of us really stops at any point. And that's it's a lot to keep pushing through, but
it's a theatrical workout for you both, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
The one other thing I think I would throw into there, as well as everything that Rebecca has just said, is also throwing in our own personal flexibility of if we had planned to go and see this show now, or if there was this workshop that we wanted to go and see now, and one of us just isn't there at that point in time, go home.
Yeah.
Or go to a coffee shop, or just go and sit down somewhere quiet and take a little you time and recover. And I think that's, if I go back 5 years when I was did a couple of episodes on tips for the Fringe, I don't think I actually said, I think I may have said take time for yourself, but I don't think I said it in those terms, where it really is take time for yourself, also in the sense of don't write anything in stone that doesn't need to be written in stone, to use your phrase. And if it is literally, I could go to this 1.5 hour workshop that will be of some benefit to me, or I could make sure I make it through this run.
You've got to take your immediate priorities first.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so delighted to hear you say you are looking after yourself, because you know as well as I do that Edinburgh flu is a big thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the weather hasn't helped this year.
Yeah.
No, it really hasn't.
The first year I was here, I caught the Edinburgh flu just in time for the Scotsman to review me.
Oh,
so
wonderful. 40 a day Judy Garland. 40 a day Lucille Ball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I swore to myself I would never let that happen again. So, yeah, we're being careful.
Yeah.
Yes, but the weather has been, the rain has been
it's
in biblical proportions on one or two occasions.
Agreed.
Yeah, we definitely got drowned a couple of times.
Yeah,
it's
we swam home yesterday.
I don't. Yeah, this year has been the worst for that. It really, really has. But there we go.
So, how can people see this show in Edinburgh?
Ah, yes.
This 5-star
They sit
show,
in a seat.
Thank you.
They sit in a seat. It happens on a stage. You just watch it.
And further details.
No. So we are at the Gilded Balloon's newest venue, which is kind of exciting, which is called the Gilded Balloon Paterhouse.
And I would just like to interrupt here. The people who've known the Fringe in the past, that is the old C Central.
3 Chambers Street.
It's in Chamber Street. It's that one. The big, lovely one. Carry on.
Absolutely, yeah. Just around the corner from the Gilded Balloon Teviot. And we are playing every day at 7:30 p.m. p.m. for 60 minutes, except for Wednesdays. And once again, that's From Judy to Betty, the stars of Old Hollywood, created and performed by Rebecca Perry with musical accompaniment by the lovely David Kingsmill.
And Quentin Norton once he takes over.
Would you like? We can give you our little 20-second pitch.
Just to throw in before that happens, that's also in the Doonstairs venue, which, again, for those of you familiar with it, is the very beautiful theatre in the basement of Adam House.
We feel it only adds to the show. It's got that vintage quality to it.
It is a proper, actually, ironically, it's gilded in some senses. So, and now it's the Gilded Balloon who have sort of paternal ownership of it, if that's the right term.
Yeah.
That fits.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is a grand venue in that sense, isn't it?
So come join us for scandalous headlines, marvelous melodies, comedy gold about Lucille Ball, Bette Davis, Betty Hutton, and Judy Garland, 4 women who refused to be just another ingenue during the golden age of Hollywood.
And after the show has concluded in here at Edinburgh, but may go on further, people may want to follow you. So presumably websites and contact details. How might people do this? If they're very intelligent, wonderful people, as I'm sure they must be. So
my website always has my touring information, and that is www.rebeccaperry.ca, and that's Perry. And then, of course, on Twitter, it's at RebeccaPerry21. And Instagram, because I made this sort of back in the day when I had my first solo show, it's at redheaded_coffeeshop_girl. And I think, and Facebook page, Redheaded Coffee Shop Girl. So that's all the ways you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the web, the World Wide Web.
Well, David, Rebecca, it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you for having us.
Particularly talking about your show, which is absolutely marvellous. I think I can genuinely say that it's a 5-star show. It certainly is from Musical Talk. And you are a bona fide star giving a powerhouse performance. So it was a real delight to see the show, and it's been an absolute delight to be in your company. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having us.
Musical Talk. And there they were. That was Rebecca Perry and David Kingsmill talking about that wonderful show From Judy to Betty, the stars of Old Hollywood. If you want to follow Rebecca online, you can do so at www.rebeccaperry.ca, which is her website. And if you like the sound of the show, you can still see it. It's on at the Gilded Balloon Powerhouse, which you may remember as the main C venue in past years, which is at 3 Chamber Street. And it's on until the 26th of August, with the exception of the 21st. It's on at 7:30 in the evening and runs for 1 hour. And it would be an excellent use of 60 minutes in your life if you do get the chance to see it. As I said at the beginning of this episode, it's a 5-star show, and Rebecca is a bona fide star, giving a powerhouse performance. And if for whatever reason you can't make it to Edinburgh, do keep an eye on whether it's on tour, or perhaps buy the album, because there is a recording of Rebecca singing the songs from the show. It's a sad thing to say, but the Edinburgh Festival Fringe only now has a few days left to run for 2019. But there is still a chance to see this show and many, many more. Many musicals and many non-musicals. So if you're wondering about whether you might want to try it, go along and see. It's the biggest arts festival in the world, and there's something for everyone. And if you're a fan of musical theatre, and frankly if you've got this far into an episode and you're not, then I can't help but feel that you're misguided. But if you are a fan, then pop along and see what you can see in that genre, because there's lots of musicals at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And to prove it, over the next few weeks and months, I'll be presenting a few more of the interviews that I conducted at this year's Fringe. So you can lament what you missed. However, there is one thing that will never be missed, and that's me. And to prove it, and we should try this empirically to see if I'm accurate, let's do an experiment. I'm going to stop broadcasting in just a minute, and then you can see if you do miss me. I think the answer will probably be no, but I'd like it backed up. So I'm going to terminate this episode in the only way I know how. It's a simple word, and it's this one. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2019. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. So, could I just have a very quick level? I'm afraid it's terrible. I'm going to be looking at my gauge periodically, so you get the light bouncing off my bald head, possibly the rain if that window's open. So, it was biblical the other day. Did you see?
I know.
Oh,
they said it was 60% of the rain of August in 3 hours.
Yeah, mostly on my head. I noticed. Yes. What did you have for breakfast?
A nitro cold brew coffee from a can. I'm a rock star like that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think we'll have brunch after this.
Yeah, I was going to say, my breakfast's coming in about an hour.
I'll carry a banana around. That's my tip for Edinburgh is just put a banana in your pocket.
We need more banana.
Protein bars as well, just in case.